chaotic child. This term was coined by Dr. Mary Mean out of Berkeley. They were studying attachment theory. And when a child is faced with a home where there is fright without any solutions, fright without solutions, that was her term, the child has no way to figure out inside of themselves what's up with this thing called life, connection, emotions, feeling, myself, and others. They don't know how it works because it's chaotic. This is a home that where there's supposed to be a dependence upon the parents. There's supposed to be a reliance. There's supposed to be bonding. There's supposed to be care, nurture. There's supposed to be all kinds of good things. But when a child is faced with this horrible problem of the very people that he or she is supposed to be dependent upon are now dangerous, that is a horrible problem for a child, for an infant, a toddler, an adolescent, or that whole range. And so life is hard for them. This is a home where there's heavy and severe addiction, where the family members are very dysfunctional, where you have people coming in and out of the home, where there's no organization around who's mom, who's dad, where there are addictions going on, etc. There could be a home where there is criminal elements happening. We have a lot of people that we encounter coming out of chaotic homes where there is just a very strong sense that they walk out of adolescence and then into adulthood very agitated, and they don't have any resolution for that past. So the attachment literature calls them unresolved. They're unresolved from that mumbo-jumbo kind of a life. Now the Bible says, train up a child in the way which he or she should go. Train him up in the way which he or she could go. And when they are old, they will not depart from it. So there is something about child rearing that God says is important. But what happens if you take a big old stick and you stick it in that little kid's soul and you just stir it all around and agitate that soul and then send that little child off into adulthood? What happens? Well, they're very agitated, chaotic. They don't know how to make a rhyme or reason of relationship. They don't understand themselves well, who am I, and they don't understand the role of others well. And back to that secure attachment that we talked about last night, where they had a well-defined sense of self and a well-defined sense of other, that I am a person with a mind, will, and emotion and needs. I can identify what those feelings states are and thought states and bring them into emotion, and that person will know me, see me, recognize me, and help me. That's non-existent.
You know, our heart really goes out to this group because their childhoods were very difficult, and the church is full of people who came from chaotic homes. And I think that's because God knows about that pain too, and he really seeks out these people for his children so that he can begin a healing process. But it takes time. The more trauma a child faces, especially if there's no way to process it, no way to talk about it, no way to get comfort, no way to have it validated, then they stay in a very chaotic state on the inside. So this kind of a home sort of produces two types of people. They sort of diverge like this. The more feisty kids who are kind of have a lot of spunk end up going toe-to-toe with this parent, even at a young age sometimes, the more dominant parent. Almost always in these homes, there's a very dominant parent and there's a very passive parent. And so the controller will often go toe-to-toe with this more controlling parent, whether it's in young childhood or adolescence, and they sort of make a vow without really realizing it. No one is ever going to control me again. Mm-hmm. I'm never going to feel the humiliation, the terror, the anxiety, the shame. I am never going to feel that again, and I am going to be in control, and I'm going to control my world so that I don't have to feel all of that. They don't really realize often that they've made that vow or that there is a good reason why they are a controlling person. And the reason is they want to keep all those childhood feelings out of awareness. So many times if I'm working with a controller and I ask them about their childhood, they just tell me it was fine. Oh, well, there's some things, but I turned out okay. And I'll press for more details and maybe hear something like, well, what was your worst memory? Oh, I don't know. I guess my dad coming home drunk and holding a gun to my head, maybe. And I'm like, wow, that's pretty serious. I can't imagine how that would feel. Well, it was bad, but I survived and I turned out okay. And it's like they have cut themselves off from the child that they once were. And so they have no sympathy for the child they once were. And they've managed their pain by creating a controlling personhood to keep everything in order so that they don't have to feel that.
And they block out their memory. They don't want to remember the unpleasant.
They don't want to remember the unpleasant.
So they live very day to day. Now, if you stop and think about this, when you live in a chaotic home and there's no rhyme or reason to it, you have a few basic goals every day. I want to get up, I want to eat, I want to put some food in my mouth. I want to be able to go do what I have to do and find some money to be able to support myself because I can't count on the people that are supposed to support me. And then I want to just basically be able to go to bed in sort of a safe way so that I can wake up the next morning. And so it's a very day-to-day mentality. And so I find that when chaotic controllers and chaotic victims come into my office, they really are very short-term in their thinking. Of a chaotic husband who's been very abusive to a wife, for instance, and she flees and finds refuge, and then they're in my office trying to work this thing out. The chaotic husband will say, hey, we're doing fine. I think it's ready for us to move back in again. We're ready to go. And I said to the wife, well, what's your trust factor on a scale of 1 to 10? And she goes, -8. And I go, are you ready to move back in? She goes, no. And he looks at her and he goes, but we had a great week. Why aren't you ready to move back in? We had a great week. And she's looking at years of being pummeled, not necessarily physically, sometimes though physically. And she's going, a week of good behavior just doesn't cut it, Buster. Now she can say doesn't cut it, Buster, in my office. She probably wouldn't say that to him out there, but it doesn't cut it. But he's thinking short term. Now, let me just also say, we tend to think of controllers and victims as the male and the female, male on top, female, and that is true in a lot of cases. I've seen some of the most atrocious situations ever with the female as the controller and the abuser in the home, and the male is the battered one, and I've seen some horrid stories like this. And so I just have to say it can happen in either direction. Is there any more you want to add to that?
Yeah, again, let's remember this exists on a continuum. You can be a mild controller, you can be medium, or you could be an extreme controller. And in my mind, it's pretty much related to the amount of childhood pain. The reason our heart so goes out to this chaotic group is that they suffered so much pain as kids.
Right.
And controllers are angry. And they're angry for a good reason. It's just all displaced on the current relationship or the current family. And I've never seen an angry controller get better until they go back in time and learn to resolve the unresolved grief. They have cut off their ability to feel sad and mourn for what they lost as kids. And when they are willing to go back and access those feelings, I just watch as the grief begins to come up, the anger begins to go down. I've never seen counting to 10 work. I haven't even seen memorizing scripture work all that well for a controller. It's an inward process, but grieving is such an important part of it. And I know you've been talking about grieving the last few weeks, and that's especially true for a chaotically attached person because they have a lot of unresolved pain. So we try and help the spouse be the comforter of that pain.
Most people think about immediate grief or grief within a short range or last 10 years or in their adulthood. What we try to help people do is learn to grieve their histories. If you walk out of here and you don't see yourself as a person with a historical context, that today you're the engine and there's 39 boxcars behind you, however old you are, and you are pulling that train and you are the sum total of your history, you will have missed something. You are a historical creature. So we will teach people, and we ourselves learn to grieve each one of those boxcars and the things that caused harm and pain and hurt and injury and caused me to be the severe pleaser, the codependent, and caused Kay to be the avoider. And the same is true for this, the vacillator, and obviously for the controller and the victim. But most people do not want to look at their histories at all.
Yeah, each style has a hard time with grief.
Yep.
Avoiders have hard time with grief because they cut off all their feelings.
Right.
And it's shameful to cry. Pleasers are so other focused, they don't even know what they feel. I was married to Mylan for, 20 years before I saw him cry for the first time. And now I see him cry probably every week. It's a huge difference. And sometimes his eyes just well up over, something that was tender. Sometimes it's just something about within him that's sad. But pleasers don't cry well. Vacilators get mad, not sad. And that's one of the first growth goals for the vacilators. Don't get mad, get sad. And controllers don't cry because they've cut off those feelings. And if you are the more sweet kid in this family, the child that's kind of more the peacemaker or has the more introverted personality, you look at what's going on and you say, I'm just going to try and disappear into the wall or go hide in my room or hide in a closet or I'm going to get out of the house as soon as I can. And these kids sort of survive by detaching, not being all there, and trying to stay under the radar.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is they're still very affected by the trauma. And so they don't have a good sense of selfhood. They come into adulthood as a victim, and they often don't have a good sense of self-worth. They don't have a good ability to grow up and make decisions, and they lack the ability to say no, because saying no in their home would have gotten them in a very dangerous situation. I've worked with victims in my office, and they have very little ability to set a boundary, and very little sense of worth that they even have the right to. And so many times, a lot of the early work with that group is just to get them to feel like they're in a safe place for the first time, many times, and that it's okay to begin to feel and develop a sense of personhood and start to learn to say no. I worked with a victim for years, and she just couldn't even get angry. And if she started to get angry, she apologized. And I'm like, don't ever apologize for your anger. It's going to be your best friend. As you start to feel angry, you're going to start to say no. And it took her about 6 years. And I used to worry about her because she had a sign on, an invisible sign that said, I can't say no, I'm a victim. You can do whatever you want to me. And believe me, a lot of men were predators around her. And she now can set boundaries like any adult, and it was a hard journey for her. But we say your marriage problems didn't start in your marriage, and your marriage is about as easy or as difficult as your childhood.
Right.
Now that's so unfair, because some people, when they get married, they don't even understand the trauma that's back here and how much it's going to bleed into their present relationship and impact their marriage. So, we have people come into our office and say, why is this so hard? And we say, look back at your childhood. There was no building in of anything good. There was just trauma back there. You didn't learn how to resolve conflict in any good way. You didn't learn how to get comfort. You didn't learn how to talk about your feelings. You didn't learn how to say no. You didn't learn how to be vulnerable. So you're starting all over. And with God's help and the Holy Spirit, we've seen some amazing healing. It's just a longer journey for a chaotic couple, or if a person's got that attachment, because there's just more trauma to overcome. But some of the most sensitive people I've ever worked with are controllers. And they're rough and tough on the outside, and they've got a lot of anger. And when you start to peel away, there's a sensitive, sweet person under that just got obliterated in childhood. There was no way they could be that in childhood and survive it. So they got rid of that sensitive, sweet part of themselves to survive. And of course, part of growth is Jesus making you giving you back who you really are.
Okay,
It
talk
just
about
takes
MOPS,
time.
the prison MOPS you do, and how just the controllers of victims are so predominant within the jail system.
Yeah, I work at a minimum security prison by my house a couple times a week or a month. I volunteer and go in and just lead a therapy group under the MOPS program. And these women have traumatic backgrounds, 98% of them. And you can just watch when they come into the room and they sit down and they start to interact. You can just almost go controller, controller, victim, victim, controller, victim. Because they're, some of them are very controlling and, want to tell you how it is. And others are just, they don't even look up. They look at their feet. It's very hard for them to even make eye contact. And yet when we start to really listen to what went on for them, I've just heard some of the saddest stories. My heart goes out to these women because of course they are where they are. They had such rough beginnings that they have no coping skills for the adult life. And, a parent is supposed to help a child regulate their stress. They're supposed to help a child contain and manage their stress. And instead, in these families, the parents are causing stress, causing stress, causing stress, causing stress, and then leaving the kids to fend for themselves. So there's often a high level of agitation. And I'm going to throw this out there because I think it's so important. I have seen people from chaotic homes respond almost always very well to medications, serotonin enhancers, antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, because I really believe, and the research is starting to show it, that when you stir up a child's brain like that at a very young age, it changes the brain chemistry. And I have seen some people from chaotic homes really make leaps forward in therapy when they get on a medication that helps calm that. It's almost like sometimes they create chaos because that's more comfortable for this group. Peace, calm is like, when's the next storm coming? When's the shoe going to drop? And so it's very hard for them to just relax in any given moment because as kids, they're always on guard. And that just messes with your whole body and your whole system.
So sometimes they'll actually start something because that is such an uneasy feeling to have quietness and calm. They'll start an argument or something because they know that after there's been an explosion, there's a predictable calm. So they'll create the predictable calm so that they can rest a little bit, and that's a resting place. Isn't that odd? But it's true and it's logical.
And then oftentimes you'll see a flip-flop. The controller will be, go too far, and then the victim will say, that's it, I'm out of here. And then they do this, and the controller pleads for mercy. Oh, I'm so sorry, I'll never do it again, I promise, I know that was wrong, I'll get help, la la la. All right, and then it starts to shift like this, and over time, it happens again, and I'm working with this dynamic right now in my office, and this woman, the more she tells me, the more horrified I am about what's gone on in her home. And she has really leaned on her faith in a very unrealistic way. God's going to change it. God's going to heal it. I have a strong God. And it's like, your kids are now, she's got 2 older kids and 2 younger kids. I said, they are damaged. I said, because you won't protect them and say no to this man. You keep waiting for God to change him, and your kids are being harmed every single day. It's pretty severe abuse. And I'm really working with her to set a boundary. For some people, the only boundary they listen to is a separation. And we are not for divorce. We don't advocate divorce, but we do sometimes advocate a legal separation to give people time to really demonstrate that they're willing to grow. Because kids matter, and abuse hurts kids.
Yeah, we could talk about this for hours, but the turn the other cheek thing in the Bible can be taken to an extreme. I remind you that when the Apostle Paul was under threat, he could have turned the other cheek in the town of Damascus, but they let him down through a basket so he could escape the people that were going to clobber him and beat him up. So, we got to remember there's times for that. And Jesus didn't allow himself to be thoroughly victimized until it was time for him to go to the cross. Until then, he pulled his little vanishing in the crowd tricks, and you know that stuff I'm talking about, where he just kind of disappears. And they would try and find him, and he'd be gone. So he evaded until it was time to go to the cross. All right, a couple of quick things. Again, the more chaotic or the more chaotic your childhood, the more chaotic your adulthood. We think that 2 Corinthians, where it says, if any man is in Christ, he's a new creature, the old things have passed away, behold, new things have come. People use that to say, see, the old things are gone. And I say, well, yes, the old things positionally before a holy God are gone. Your guilt, your shame, the condemnation, all of my sin was nailed to the cross with Christ. But my feelings, my memories, my education, my thoughts, my desires, my taste for pepperoni pizza, it's all still there. It doesn't go away. Otherwise, God would completely erase my C drive. Now, I'd like to get some of my C drive cleared off. I remember far too much stuff, and I like to get some of those cookies taken off if I could, but I don't think there's any way to do that.
I don't know. These guys are pretty good.
Yeah, these technical team is good. I might have them see if they can do a little disc scan on my brain or something and clear off some of my details. But, we are then left with, what's sanctification all about, you see? Sanctification is about growth from being born again into fatherhood in the faith, and that is a process of taking off the old man and putting on the new man. So, a lot of chaotic people end up coming into the church because there is structure, there is good news, there is order. And they come to the church and it feels so good. And they become typically zealous for what they are believing, and they're excited about it. So oftentimes they become deeply committed to the Bible and to service, and so they oftentimes are targeted as a leader, for instance, as a controller, to step into leadership. But their ability to work with people, their peopleology, is very controlling, and so they don't know how to lead well because of that. So, and I have a lot of pastors in my office coming in, and I see a lot of very dominant pastors. It's my way or the highway. You do this or you're out of the church. And I've seen dominant pastors absolutely micromanage every single aspect of the church. And I stop and I go, so you really micromanage everybody in your church. How chaotic was your childhood? And they say, well, it has nothing to do with it. And I go, oh, yes, it does. If you're in my office, it has a lot to do with it. So how chaotic was your childhood? And it turns out, well, it was very chaotic. And I go, well, you have some more growth to go here, because you're cutting everybody off at the knees, including your wife and your kids, and they are dispensable for the cross. And they aren't supposed to be dispensable. They're supposed to be loved, et cetera, et cetera. Now, what do you want to talk about?
The parent. Controllers, victims as parents.
Oh, I was off on controllers as church leaders, wasn't I?
I know, yeah, you were.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, stop and think about that, though, as if you put that person in their parent. You go, oh, see, he's a nice Christian dad. That child's dad is pastor. That child's mom is heavily involved in ministry. But they're dominant. And as parents, they don't listen well. They want outward behavior. They want this structure maintained. They control to create a structure that allows them to rest. And you don't matter. You just do what I want you to do. Then I can relax. Don't change a thing. Don't move the cheese. Do it just like it's supposed to be. What would you add to that?
Well, I don't think controllers or victims often realize this, but a little child is a reminder of the child they once were. And they have really tried to get rid of that reality. And so a little child is just a bundle of feelings and needs. And so I've worked with so many MOPS moms who did fine until they had a kid, and then they come up to me and say, I don't know what's wrong, but I feel rage toward my child, and I don't want to act on that. And I'm so ashamed to even tell you this, but it's not even anger, it's rage. And sometimes I can't help it. It just comes out. And I always ask, did you have a rough childhood? And they always say, yes, I did. And I'll say, well, it's like this little kid is now reminding you of the child you once were. And what would have happened if you would have said, no? She said, I would have gotten knocked across the room. I would have gotten the belt. So you don't know what to do when this little kid says, no. You're lost. You just feel this flood of anger that has never been expressed often about the real perpetrators. And so it's overwhelming. And even the victims can feel this because when the controller leaves the house, sometimes if the other parent is alone with the kids, then the anger that they have inside will come out towards the kids. So, you think, well, how can people do that to their kids? Because they don't remember what it felt like to be a kid. They have cut off that awareness. And so when they're angry or hurting their own kids, they have cut off the feeling of what it was like to be a child. To them, you got to survive. And so it's sort of like the extreme avoider. I'm going to make you tough. You got to be tough out in this world. And they really think their job is to toughen up their kids, because in their world, they wouldn't have survived if they weren't tough. So controllers really can struggle with anger and wanting to just, kids aren't very always controllable, and it does move the cheese, and controllers can have a hard time with that.
So if anybody is going to be abusive to a child, it's going to be more typically the chaotically attached parent, either victim or controller. I just finished writing these chapters for our new book, How We Love Our Kids, and it was just, I was miserable writing those chapters. They were very hard to write because the truth and the reality of the research, the newspapers, etc., are just horrid as to what actually happens with child abuse in these kinds of homes. In Los Angeles, I saw an article in one of the newspapers it was actually a newscast where they were showing a picture of a dumpster in an inner city area, and it was a picture of a male, or of an adult hand holding a baby by the heel over the dumpster, and there was a big red line through it saying, "Don't dump a baby in here." In the LA area, they have this amnesty thing where you can drop a child off at any fire station or hospital, no questions asked. You just drop them off. You want to get rid of them because the controller parent is immensely overwhelmed by that child. As Kay said, it's a reminder of their pain. And you want to take a chaotic adult in a parenthood role and get them absolutely agitated up to a 10, have that baby start crying, and then get them not able to calm that child down. They go nuts. They don't know what to do. It arouses and agitates everything inside of them unpleasant. And if there's going to be a child endangerment, shaking the child, hurting the child, harming the child, putting a child in the room so that they'll cry until they fall asleep, all kinds of abuses like that come from this kind of a home. It's sad to talk about, but it's true. It happens all around us in all of our communities. And we must be aware that it's there, and it's our responsibility, if we know those kinds of things, to help report them so that child can be extricated from that home. I can't accentuate that enough.
And come around those parents and support them.
That's right.
The victim, on the other hand, as a parent, tends to be almost like one of the kids they don't have any more of a voice than the kids do. And I talked to a lot of people from homes where they had a controlling parent, and the other parent was never able to protect them because they were just as afraid of this person as the kids were. And that's true of the case I'm working with.
So they don't protect the child.
They don't protect, and because there's really a fear of what the reprisal will be if they step up and say no to this controlling person.
And what that can also lead to is they're so afraid of the controller that they will actually and can be abusive to the child to get them to stop and quiet down because they're so afraid of what will happen. So they will try to turn that anger down or toward the child and stop their behaviors. So what about sexually? Let's take a few moments and talk about controllers and victims in the sexual arena. It's chaotic, as you could imagine.
Yeah, I think this group is probably more prone to addictions than any other group, and a lot of the women that I work with the prison is an extreme example, but they have addictions of all kinds. And it makes sense. There's a lot of pain to cover up, and they don't know how to process that pain in relationship, and so the only way they know how to get rid of it is through addictions. Sexual addiction could be one. Alcohol, drugs are very common ways to make the pain go away, make that agitation calm down. And so many times, though, for the controller, whether they're male or female, they obviously control the the frequency and the kind of sex that's going on. I've worked with Christian families where a controlling male, I've had 3 of these, asked the female who was a victim to do threesomes, to do things sexually that were just way out of what was biblically right. And even though this victim did not want to do these things, she felt like she had no voice and agreed to participate in things that were very distressing to her. But she felt like she would really be in serious danger to not comply. So, there's a level of control in especially extreme cases that's, we don't often think is going on in the church, and it is going on.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we're talking about difficult things, but our heart goes out to the wounds that are driving those behaviors. There are some serious injuries.
Controlling and controllers and victims are very impulsive. Remember I said they're day-to-day and short-term? So they're very impulsive. So sex is impulsive. If they want sex now, they want sex now. If you're a controller, it's kind of like dancing with a 100-pound gorilla, or an 800-pound gorilla. You stop dancing when the gorilla wants to stop dancing. And if a controller says, I want to have sex, they want to have sex now. They're very non-discriminating about what that might be. There might be kids crying, it might be dinner time, it could be anything. They want to, why? Because sex is a mood alterer also for them. If they're agitated, sex is something that helps calm them down and soothe them. It's part of their addictive state. And so you will find high levels of pornography addiction, high levels of sexual promiscuity, and again, victims also fall into the category of having a lot of premarital pregnancies, and but the controller is going to be the first one to say, go get that aborted, because I don't want that hassle, but it creates a lot of problems and conflicts, and that is where a lot of it starts. We have victims. I study and teach Kung Fu, and we have victims come into our studio for assertiveness training, and we will tell them we're going to approach you and we want you to just put up your hand and say stop, don't come any further. And there'll be a group of women, and there'll be 3 or 4 of us, and we will walk toward the person, and the victims freeze. They're like deer in the headlights. They have no voice. They choke. They can't put up their hand, and they can get nothing out of their voice. Nothing. They can't say no. And we're friendlies, simulating an approach. So for the victim and the chaotic controller, again, our hearts go out, but they have a lot of redevelopment work to do to kind of go back to what the parents were supposed to be doing and help learn those things all over. And you know what? It is fantastic to see people come to know Christ, decide that where they're at is not a great place to be, and decide they want to do something about it. Because if you choose to grow, I don't care who you are, if you're alive on this side of the grass, you can make changes in your life.
Especially in cases where there has been sexual abuse or physical violence for a person in a home growing up. I've seen numerous cases where sex gets paired with pain. Mm-hmm. And I've had women tell me, I can't get aroused unless I have some sort of a fantasy of violence. Or I think people who lean towards things that go out to an edge where pain is involved with sex have had trauma in their childhoods. And many, many times they don't realize that association is connected to the trauma. They just kind of are ashamed of it, or in some cases just go with it because they find that they can't really enjoy sex without some sort of pain or trauma associated with it. It's very sad. Far cry from what God created, but they lived a far cry from the childhood God hoped for.
Right.
So.